You wake up. You check your phone. You scroll. You wait. You wait for something to click inside you. A spark. A surge. That magical feeling that finally makes you want to move. But it never comes. And then you tell yourself the same lie you've been telling yourself for weeks. Maybe years. I'm just not motivated right now. Here's the truth you don't want to hear. Motivation is not coming. It never was. And the reason you're stuck isn't because you lack inspiration. It's because you've been chasing a ghost. This video will show you what the ancient philosophers knew and what modern culture has forgotten. That waiting for motivation is the very thing keeping you paralyzed. That action doesn't follow feeling. Feeling follows action. And that the real key to transformation isn't found in a burst of energy, but in something far quieter, far deeper, and infinitely more powerful. By the end of this, you'll understand why discipline, not desire, builds the life you want, and why the people who accomplish the most are often the ones who feel the least like doing it. Let's begin with something uncomfortable. Motivation is a lie sold to you by people who profit from your waiting. The self-help industry, the endless stream of content designed to pump you up, the before and after transformations that promise you'll feel ready if you just consume one more video, one more quote, one more success story. But here's what they don't tell you. Motivation is an emotion, and like all emotions, it's temporary, unreliable, and outside your control. The Stoics understood this 2,000 years ago. Epictetus taught that we must distinguish between what is up to us and what is not. Your feelings? Not up to you. Your actions? Completely up to you. So why do we keep waiting? Because we've been conditioned to believe that internal alignment must precede external action. That we need to feel good before we do good. That clarity comes before movement. But this is backward. Movement creates clarity. Action generates emotion. You don't think your way into a new kind of living. You live your way into a new kind of thinking. The sculptor doesn't wait to feel inspired before touching the stone. The writer doesn't wait for the muse before sitting at the desk. They show up. They begin. And somewhere in the doing, the feeling arrives. Not because it was summoned, but because it was earned. Consider the person who says they'll start exercising once they feel motivated. Weeks pass. Months. Nothing changes. Now consider the person who puts on their shoes and walks out the door, regardless of how they feel. 5 minutes into the walk, something shifts. The body warms. The mind clears. By the end, they feel better than they did sitting on the couch waiting for readiness. What changed? Not their motivation, their action. The feeling followed the decision, not the other way around. This is the inversion that changes everything. You've been taught that emotion is the engine and behavior is the passenger. But in reality, behavior is the engine. Emotion is just smoke out the back. When you act despite resistance, you send a signal to your own nervous system. You teach yourself that you are not governed by how you feel. You teach yourself that you are capable of self-command. And that teaching, that internal evidence, becomes the foundation of confidence. Not confidence born from success. Confidence born from integrity. The integrity between what you say you'll do and what you actually do. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, wrote to himself each morning, reminding himself not of his authority, but of his duty. He didn't write about how he felt. He wrote about what needed to be done. And he did it, not because he was a superhuman, but because he understood that the gap between intention and action is where character dies. And character, not charisma, is what builds a life worth living. Now let's talk about what replaces motivation. The word is discipline, but not the harsh, militaristic version you're imagining. Not the gritted teeth and clenched fists. That's just another form of emotional dependency. Real discipline is calm. It's quiet. It's the decision made once, deeply, so that it doesn't need to be remade every single morning. It's the framework that holds you when feelings fail. And feelings always fail. Think of discipline as architecture. Motivation is weather. Weather changes. It's sunny, then it rains, then it's cold. You can't build a house on weather, but you can build a house that stands regardless of weather. That house is your routine, your non-negotiable structure, your commitment to the process, not the outcome. The Stoics called this living in accordance with nature. Not your nature as a creature of comfort and convenience, but your nature as a rational being capable of choice. You have the ability, unlike any other creature, to act against your immediate impulses in service of a larger vision. That ability is your superpower, but only if you use it. Here's the shift most people miss. They think discipline is about forcing yourself to do hard things. But discipline isn't force. It's alignment. It's the removal of internal negotiation. When you wake up and your alarm goes off, the undisciplined mind opens a debate. Should I? Do I feel like it? What if I start tomorrow? The disciplined mind doesn't debate. It moves. Not because it's stronger, because it's simpler. One decision. One direction. No static. Let me give you a modern example. You've decided to write every day. The first morning you wake up and you don't feel like it. The motivational approach says, watch a video, listen to music, get pumped up, then write. The disciplined approach says, sit down and write. The difference seems small, but over a year, one approach produces a body of work. The other produces a playlist. One builds skill. The other builds dependency. And here's the deeper truth. The more you wait for the feeling, the weaker the muscle of initiation becomes. You train yourself to be passive, to be a reactor, not an actor. And passivity over time becomes despair. Seneca warned of this. He said we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The dread of doing the thing is almost always worse than doing the thing itself. The resistance you feel before you start is not evidence that you shouldn't start. It's evidence that you're about to do something meaningful, because resistance only appears in the presence of growth. If it were easy, it wouldn't change you. And if it doesn't change you, why do it at all? So what happens when you stop waiting and start acting? First, nothing. You feel the same, maybe worse, because now you're uncomfortable and you're not even getting the emotional reward you were promised. But keep going, because something is happening beneath the surface. You're reprogramming your identity. Every time you act in alignment with who you want to become, you cast a vote for that version of yourself. One vote doesn't elect a president, but 1,000 votes do. You're not building motivation. You're building evidence. Evidence that you are the kind of person who does what they say. And that evidence over time becomes unshakable. Before we go deeper, I want to invite you to do something small but significant. If this idea is landing for you, if you're beginning to see the difference between chasing feelings and choosing action, subscribe to this channel. Not because I need you to, but because it's a micro-commitment, a quiet decision that says, I'm done scrolling passively. I'm choosing to engage with ideas that challenge me. And if you've had a moment of recognition in what we've explored so far, leave a comment. Not with praise, but with honesty. What's the one thing you've been waiting to feel ready for? Say it out loud. Make it real. Because naming the resistance is the first step to moving through it. Now let's go deeper. Let's talk about fear. Because that's what motivation really is. It's not the presence of excitement. It's the absence of fear. And when people say they're not motivated, what they often mean is, I'm afraid. Afraid of failure. Afraid of discomfort. Afraid of discovering I'm not who I thought I was. The Stoics didn't deny fear. They walked toward it. Not recklessly, but deliberately. Because they knew that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the presence of fear. And every time you act despite fear, you take power away from it. Here's the reversal. You think you need to get rid of the fear before you move. But the fear only leaves after you move. It's not a gatekeeper. It's a shadow. And shadows disappear when you walk into the light. The light, in this case, is clarity. And clarity only comes from contact with reality. You can't think your way to clarity. You have to live your way there. You have to test your assumptions, face the outcome, and adjust. That's growth. That's real confidence. Not the borrowed confidence of a motivational quote, but the earned confidence of repeated action. Consider the student who's afraid to fail an exam. If they wait until the fear goes away, they'll never study. But if they study despite the fear, two things happen. One, they learn the material. 2, they learn that fear doesn't control them. And the second lesson is more valuable than the first, because it transfers. It applies to the next challenge and the next. Over time, they stop asking, "Am I afraid?" and start asking, "What needs to be done?" That's freedom. Not freedom from fear, but freedom from being ruled by it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The outside event is how you feel. The inside power is what you choose. And the moment you stop negotiating with your feelings, the moment you stop asking permission from your emotions to act, you become dangerous. Not to others, to limitations, to excuses, to the small, comfortable version of yourself that wants to stay safe. So here's what you need instead of motivation. You need a reason so deep that it doesn't need to be refreshed every morning. Not a surface goal. Not, I want to look good or I want to make money. Those are fine, but they won't hold you when it's hard. You need something tied to your values, to who you want to be, to the kind of life you want to look back on. The Stoics called this your ruling principle, your North Star. And once you have it, every action becomes either aligned or misaligned. There's no confusion, just direction. Ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be? Not what do I want to have? Not what do I want people to think of me? But who do I want to be when no one's watching? When it's hard? When I'm tired? That answer is your foundation. And once it's set, motivation becomes irrelevant. Because you're no longer chasing a feeling. You're honoring a commitment. And commitment doesn't negotiate. Let's talk about what happens when you build your life on discipline instead of desire. First, it feels like loss. You're giving up the highs, the emotional rushes, the fantasy that one day you'll wake up transformed, effortlessly driven, finally ready. You're trading that fantasy for something that feels, at first, like nothing. A quiet morning routine, a decision made in the dark, a small promise kept. It doesn't feel like progress, but it is, because progress isn't a feeling. It's a direction. Here's what the culture won't tell you. The people you admire, the ones who seem unstoppable, aren't motivated most of the time. They're committed. And commitment looks boring from the outside. It looks like showing up on the days you don't want to. It looks like doing the thing even when no one's watching, even when there's no immediate reward, even when your brain is screaming at you to stop. That's not discipline as punishment. That's discipline as devotion. Devotion to a future self you haven't met yet but have decided to honor. The Stoics practiced something called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. They imagined the worst that could happen, not to torture themselves, but to remove the shock of difficulty. They knew that if you expect ease, you'll break at the first hardship. But if you expect resistance and prepare for it, you become unshakable. So let me ask you, what's the worst part of the thing you're avoiding? Is it the discomfort, the time it takes, the possibility of failure? Name it, look at it, and then ask, can I survive that? The answer is almost always yes. And once you know you can survive it, it loses its power. Now let's address the myth of balance. You've been told that you need to feel good, stay positive, keep your energy up, that if you're struggling, something's wrong. But struggle isn't evidence of failure. It's evidence of growth. The muscle doesn't grow during the workout. It grows during the recovery from the breakdown. Your character works the same way. You don't become resilient by avoiding pain. You become resilient by moving through it and discovering you're still standing. Epictetus was born a slave. He was crippled, powerless, owned by another human being. And yet he became one of the most influential philosophers in history. Not because his circumstances were easy, because his mind was free. He wrote, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." He didn't wait for freedom to philosophize. He philosophized his way to freedom. Internal freedom, the kind that no one can take from you. And that's available to you right now. Not when your life gets easier. Not when you feel better. Now, here's the inversion. You think your circumstances need to change before you can act. But your circumstances will only change after you act. You're waiting for permission from the outside world. But the outside world is waiting for a signal from you. And that signal is your behavior. When you act like the person you want to become, the world begins to treat you that way. Not because the world is kind, because the world is responsive. It reflects what you project. And if you project hesitation, doubt, and passivity, that's what you'll get back. Let me give you a real example. Someone wants to be a writer but doesn't write because they don't have the perfect setup. No office, no time, no audience. They wait. Years pass. Now imagine someone else who writes every morning for 20 minutes on their phone during their commute. No setup. No audience. Just repetition. In a year, one person has 100 reasons why they're not a writer. The other has 100 pages. Who's the writer? Not the one with the dream. The one with the draft. This is what Seneca meant when he said, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." You're not running out of time. You're running out of decisions. Every moment you wait for the right feeling is a moment you could have spent building the right habit. And habits, not feelings, are the architecture of life. Show me your habits and I'll show you your future. Not your goals. Not your wishes. Your habits. Because your habits are your truth. So what does this look like practically? It means you stop asking how you feel and start asking what's next. You build a system so simple that you can't fail. Not a system dependent on willpower. A system dependent on structure. You remove friction. You make the desired behavior easier than the undesired one. You don't rely on strength. You rely on design. The Stoics didn't rely on motivation either. They relied on rhythm. Morning reflection, evening review, daily practice. Not because it was exciting, because it worked. Here's the shift that changes everything. Most people treat their goals like destinations. I'll be happy when I get there. But the Stoics knew better. The goal isn't the destination. The goal is who you become on the way. Because once you arrive, there's another mountain. And if you haven't learned to enjoy the climb, you'll spend your whole life miserable, chasing peaks you never savor. Happiness isn't at the top. It's in the practice, in the showing up, in the integrity of the process. And this is where peace lives. Not in achievement, in alignment. When your actions match your values, when your behavior reflects your beliefs, you stop feeling fractured. You stop living in constant negotiation with yourself. You become whole. And that wholeness, that inner coherence, is what people mistake for confidence. But it's not confidence. It's congruence. And congruence doesn't come from success. It comes from consistency. Let's go even deeper. Let's talk about suffering. Because that's what you're really trying to avoid when you wait for motivation. You're trying to avoid discomfort. But here's the hard truth. You're going to suffer either way. You'll either suffer the pain of discipline, or you'll suffer the pain of regret. One is sharp and short. The other is dull and endless. The Stoics chose the first. They leaned into difficulty because they knew it made them stronger. They knew that the easy path doesn't lead anywhere worth going. Marcus Aurelius faced plague, war, betrayal, and the weight of an empire. He could have numbed himself. He could have escaped into pleasure or power. But instead, he wrote. He reflected. He practiced philosophy not as theory but as survival. And what he left behind wasn't a record of his suffering. It was a record of his response to it. That's legacy. Not what happens to you, how you meet it. Here's the reversal you need to internalize. Pain is not the problem. Meaningless pain is the problem. If you suffer because you're growing, because you're building, because you're becoming, that suffering has dignity. But if you suffer because you're stuck, because you're avoiding, because you're waiting, that suffering is poison. It drains you and gives nothing back. So choose your suffering. Choose the one that builds. And when it's hard, remind yourself, this is the cost of becoming. Now, what about failure? Because that's the other thing motivation promises to protect you from. It says wait until you're ready and you won't fail. But that's a lie. You'll fail either way. The only question is whether you fail while trying or fail by never starting. And only one of those teaches you anything. The Stoics didn't fear failure. They expected it. They saw it as information, as redirection. Seneca said, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials." Failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the evidence of effort, and effort over time becomes mastery. So reframe failure. Stop seeing it as a verdict on your worth and start seeing it as data. What worked? What didn't? What can I adjust? When you approach life as an experiment rather than a test, you stop being fragile. You become anti-fragile. You get stronger from stress, not weaker. And that's the ultimate freedom. Not freedom from difficulty. Freedom to grow because of it. Let me bring this into the present moment. Right now, as you're listening to this, there's something you know you should be doing. Something you've been putting off. Maybe it's small. Maybe it's life-changing. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you've been waiting. Waiting to feel ready. Waiting for clarity. Waiting for the stars to align. But here's the truth. The stars are never going to align. The feeling is never going to arrive on its own. And every day you wait, you're training yourself to be someone who waits. So here's the practice. When you finish this video, don't sit in inspiration. Move. Do one thing. Not the whole project. Not the entire transformation. One thing. Send the email. Write the first sentence. Put on your shoes. Take the first step. Not because it's easy. Because it's true. Because it's aligned. And because that one action, that one quiet decision, is the beginning of everything. The Stoics believed that philosophy wasn't something you studied. It was something you lived. And the core practice was simple. Control what you can, accept what you can't, and know the difference. You can't control how you feel, but you can control what you do. You can't control the outcome, but you can control the effort. And when you pour yourself into what's within your power, everything else becomes noise. Here's the final inversion. You think you need to feel strong to act strong, but you become strong by acting strong when you feel weak. That's the forge. That's where character is made. Not in the easy moments. In the moments when every part of you wants to quit and you don't. Not because you're special, because you decided. And that decision, repeated, becomes identity. And identity shapes destiny. So no, you don't need motivation. You never did. What you need is a reason worth honoring, a structure worth trusting, and the courage to move before you're ready. You need to stop waiting for permission from your feelings and start acting on your principles. You need to understand that the gap between who you are and who you want to be is crossed not by thinking, but by doing. And that the life you're waiting to feel ready for is already here. It's been here the whole time. You've just been standing at the threshold, waiting for an invitation that was never coming. The door was always open. You just had to walk through it. And the moment you do, everything changes. Not because the world is different, because you are. And when you change, the world has no choice but to respond. That's not magic. That's momentum. That's discipline. That's philosophy made flesh. That's the thing you needed all along. Not a feeling, a decision. Not someday, today. Not when you're ready, now. You don't need motivation. You need to begin. And beginning, no matter how small, is the only thing that's ever mattered.